Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Things We Know. Today, I always sing that last little part when
Me
I'm really
too.
excited about our guests. I do like an Oprah thing there.
We
The
should we
things
should have
we
some tone bars behind you. Like ding ding
right?
ding.
So today, we are so thrilled to welcome someone who we love and deeply admire, our friend, former colleague, and quite frankly, just all-around goddess, Rebecca Sang. If you know her, you know, and if you don't, you're about to. You're about to fall in love.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad. Rebecca is a writer, a teacher, an herbalist, a gardener, and a deeply thoughtful human. An amazing mom. I don't know why I didn't write that, but I definitely know this. Deeply thoughtful human who shares her story with honesty and humor and soul. She brings voice to the often unspoken experience of living with ADHD as a woman, and especially as a woman in these years of parenting and showing up fully in her own rhythm rather than one prescribed by the world.
Yay, we're so happy to have you. Thank you for saying yes.
I'm really happy to be here.
Yay. Okay, so let's just start from the beginning. Can you share a little bit about your personal journey with ADHD and how it's shaped the way you live, the way you parent?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a person who was diagnosed in midlife with ADHD, and interestingly enough, I definitely don't present as a typical person with ADHD. In fact, the first time I attempted to get diagnosed, I did a pre-screening with my doctor, and they asked me a couple questions, and they were like, "Oh, there's no way that you could possibly have ADHD because you're just, you've got several master's degrees, and you don't have a bad academic record." They asked me about my driving record. They're just like, "No, no, no, you're too." I don't know what they thought, and I couldn't get any help.
Wow.
um, and so it's interesting to be a person who I think doesn't present with ADHD and never had been suspected of that when I was in school because I was a really, really good student. In fact, I often tell people I'm kind of like Hermione Granger, although Harry Potter's a bit on the outs right now. But
Fair.
because I loved school and I was good at school and I liked it so much that I kept going back to school over and over and over again. That's because it's something I'm interested in and lights
Mm.
me up. And so I didn't suspect that I had ADHD until after I had a baby and started to feel underwater a lot of the time. And I think that's a common experience for new parents. So again, I didn't immediately think ADHD. I just thought it's hard to be a new parent, especially in this strangely patriarchal and capitalist society, an individualistic society. And um, and then I started seeing things online about ADHD, like a lot of people do. And I can have an unfortunately dismissive or judgmental side to me, as many of us do. And so people would post things, and I would just be like, "Oh, that's weird. Like everybody does that." So
Mm.
someone would post something about a typical symptom of ADHD, like, when you hyper focus on something and you lose track of time, and then, you know, the next thing you know, you're late to a meeting or whatnot. I just feel like, yeah, everyone does that. Or there's a typical thing of an ADHD person called a doom pile, where everything in your room looks pretty clean, and then you open up a drawer or you open up a closet or specifically a bag, and there'll just be like an incredible amount of mess in there.
Huh.
And I was like, yeah, everyone does that, right? You get sick of cleaning, you just shove it all in a bag and you're done. And at some point, I realized, wait a minute, does everybody do that? Or is it just that I do that? And so I started to look more into it. And I went through a real challenging grieving process once I realized that I did really present as a person with ADHD who is a woman and who is in midlife. So even though in some ways it doesn't look on the surface like I have ADHD, um, once you get to know more about what that looks like in women and specifically in women in midlife, I started to realize that I have a lot of very typical characteristics of it. And my family has always been a family that we pride ourselves on our intelligence and our intellect. My father was highly intellectual, also super ADHD. I realize now, but I didn't
Mm.
know that at the time. My father was actually like a literal genius.
Wow.
And so, and my mom is also very intelligent, and everyone. So it's like, once I started to think like, wait a minute, there's something wrong with my brain. I was horrified, to be honest with you, and I felt so much pain and shame around it. And I think that that grieving process was actually ultimately helpful to me into coming into a place of acceptance. Because once I got through it and once I started to acknowledge, that yes, I can have a brain that I'm proud of, that does carry a lot of intelligence, but also has some differences. I started to be able to accept those differences. And I think if you had asked me kind of like more when we were all hanging out more, do you love and accept yourself? I would have been like, of course I love and accept myself. But now that I actually love and accept myself, I realized how little I did and how much I was always trying to shove myself into doing things in a neurotypical way rather than
Mm.
acknowledging that I really need to do certain things differently.
Mhm.
And so it's been really, really powerful to come to that place. And I would say that it's also a little bit lucky that I did, because then, a year or two after I realized that I had ADHD, we started to look into neurodivergence in the rest of my family. And it turns out that there is quite a bit of neurodivergence in the rest of my family. And I was already in a place where I could see how beneficial it is to realize that in myself, how really we are talking about neurodiversity. We're talking about just different brains doing different things and doing them
Yeah.
differently, and to really be a guide in my family as they went through experimenting and realizing that we're all
Mm.
a happy little neurospicy family.
I love this. We actually did a episode called like neurodivergence makes the world go round, something like that. I forget what we called it, but we'll link it in the show notes because that was kind of our focus was actually how much better this world and society and like everything has been because of the contributions of neurodivergence, right? Because of the like there's such a high intellectual um curiosity and artistry happening in the world of neurodivergence, and we just didn't have a word for it. So I love that about you, and those of us who've worked with you know how brilliant you are. But I also want to pause and just say this is so validating to hear. Not, I mean, I will get to me, but so many women don't realize they have ADHD until later in life, and when the demands of it, and also because girls are just so conditioned to multitask, and they can get away with it. They're so like get away with it, meaning like they can actually impress and deflect by those things as they're little. Like they can just so nobody really looks in and sees how it's affecting them or like where it's coming from. So I think that's probably half the reason why people don't know till later. But just the demands of parenting, work, and caregiving all crash together, and even for neurotypical people, that's a what is wrong with me time. So your story gives people language for something that they felt and couldn't name. And we do have a lot of women of all ages listening, as it turns out. So I appreciate that. I would say listening to you, like I have definitely been in moments in my parenting years where I'm like, I wonder if I have ADHD. And being like the person who wants to figure things out, got a referral and went through like this extensive, like very expensive and extensive, like 6 appointments with the Northwest ADHD Center, and was like, okay, I must have it. And it was all kind of around the time where things were happening, like with my dad's health and Griffin's diagnosis and him starting to have absence seizures at the time. And I remember I came out of it and they were like, well, no, they didn't give me the diagnosis, which still felt wrong. They're like, but you do have some like low level persistent depression and it can look the same. I was like, well,
Mm.
then like we all have some version of this then. Like there's something, like it was this it was sort of this coping thing that was like creating things that could look that way, where I would like show up to an appointment a day early, or like there was like these random things, but they gave me this test that didn't seem to totally apply. Like, no, I didn't fail and I didn't get fired, but that doesn't mean that I mean, yes, I failed at things. I mean, I didn't fail classes, is what I mean. Like I didn't have a bunch of things that I just didn't follow through on back then. But right now, I feel like I can't finish anything. So I wonder if there's women listening to you out there who've had experiences like me that are like, what is it? Actually, it would be really helpful to have something that has a label, even though I know it's not easy, but that's something that has some sort of um, diagnosis that you can follow. That's always been my thing with Griffin and with me. It's like I just want to know what this is so that I can do what I can to succeed with it. So I really appreciate your share. That's really helpful.
Did it feel that way once you got the diagnosis? I mean, I totally get the grief because I mean, my only like connection to that is when my son was diagnosed with a peanut allergy. I was furious. I was, how dare he? Not him, but I was just like, he does not have a peanut. And also like I had to grieve the fear, the knowing that I was gonna have to be fearful for him all the time. And once you knew it, it's like, oh God, thank God we found out. So did you feel once you got through the grief some contentment? I don't know if that's the right word, but like, okay, well, at least I know.
Relief. Yeah.
Relief. Yeah, that's a better word.
So it's interesting because I actually um, I knew that I had ADHD. I had had that unsuccessful attempt at getting diagnosed the first time. And I think a lot of people have the experience that you have, Kari, that you're describing. And a lot of, when I attempted to get diagnosed the first time, they were like, well, you just have anxiety. So
Mm.
um, we will assist you if you want to go on anti-anxiety medication, but we will not assist you if you continue to try to get assessed for ADHD, right? And it is true that I am a person, when I get stressed, the direction I go is in towards anxiety, right? And I've had issues with anxiety before, but what happens with ADHD and a lot of forms of neurodiversity is that people spend so much time trying to make themselves function well in a world that is not set up for them, that extra cognitive load, especially if you start to add on things like parenting, caring for elders, the many different demands on our attention, but specifically anything that requires hypervigilance, um, that extra cognitive load makes people anxious. It's
Right.
stressful and depleting, and so it can be really, really tricky. And so anyway, for me, I went through my grieving process. I got really clear that I had ADHD. I began working with different kinds of strategies to assist myself to function better and complete the things that I want to do and, live and thrive in this world. And then once we started to look at things around people in my family and I realized that I wanted to be really, really helpful in that process, I decided to get a formal diagnosis and really push for it a second time. Because I
Oh,
knew that
interesting.
if once that they were looking at specifically my daughter and some challenges that she's having, um, that me just saying I have ADHD without a formal diagnosis was not going to carry any weight with anyone in the scholastic system, right? So that's when I was like, okay, I need a formal diagnosis. And I went and pushed again. And enough time had passed that by the time I tried a second time, the the medical system that I use, which is Kaiser, had actually wised up a lot and was much easier the
Mm.
second time. And I got, you know, I was diagnosed within like a week or something the second time that I pushed for
Wow.
it. And I think just there's just a growing awareness, even in kind of slow moving, big bureaucratic systems, of how prevalent this is. But I do want to just return to the fact that people will often get diagnosed with mood disorders because they are doing a lot of things that are really hard on ourselves, especially in times of stress, and they can get treatment for the mood disorders like depression and anxiety and other things, even OCD for some folks. Um, and the underlying cause is not recognized for a
Hmm.
long time. And also that in midlife specifically, for women, our hormones play a huge, huge part. And I said before, I'm not an expert, which I'm not, but one of the benefits you could say of having ADHD is to hyper focus on things you're interested in. And so, of course, once I decided that I wasn't like this inherently flawed human, but that maybe there were benefits or gifts of my ADHD, I threw myself into learning a lot about it. And one of the things that I learned is that estrogen can create a lot of dopamine in the brain. And so when we go through perimenopause, when we go through menopause, when we go through anything where we're having big fluctuations that involve estrogen, um, our ADHD symptoms can be worse
Mm.
because of that. Or also during times of stress, our ADHD symptoms will be worse. Just like anything, even different health conditions that people have, right? Like more of a physical health condition, when there's stress, and if especially if it's chronic stress, those symptoms are going to get worse, right? And so one of the things that I was really thinking about this morning as I went on my walk is like, wow, what can I do to really nourish myself, so that I'm less of a frenetic ADHD kind of person and more of a person who's really embracing the special, unique traits of my brain.
Mm. That's
So,
really, oh, go
no,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just so helpful and really reassuring. I'm sure for anyone listening who has any, even inklings of this, that there's no shame in this, that there's actually so much freedom, right? But we all just assume we should always have high executive function. So when it's not, it's like either embarrassing or shameful or like something we have to fix and not something we get to understand and ride differently. So I love all of your wisdom around this. Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
No, 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 that was great. I guess so. I hear the piece about getting diagnosed and hormones, but does this mean you always had ADHD, or did you literally start to get it as you went through perimenopause and menopause? And I maybe don't know the answer to that, but with having this conversation with so many midlife women, and again, our friend Katie Kearns was the one who brought this idea to our attention last year. I've never asked the question of a woman who has got diagnosed midlife. Like, does this mean you always had it and you were undiagnosed?
That is the big question,
Okay.
right? But this is what I'll say is true for me. Um, so I love that when we talk about folks who have autism, we recognize that there's this spectrum, right?
Yep.
And I think about if we talked about ADHD as something with a spectrum, that maybe all people are on somewhere, right? And
Hmm.
so you have things like, people talk a lot about social media and how that makes them feel fragmented and distracted and unable to focus, unable to read a book anymore. Do all those people have ADHD? Right. So I think, like, okay, so if we look at this as a spectrum, we could say, like, well, maybe from like 1 to 5 we call normal, and from 5 to 7 we call borderline, and 7 to 10 or something we call ADHD. Maybe there's a lot of things that push us higher and higher on this kind of scale, right?
Hmm.
And so probably when I was young, I didn't have as many stressors in my life, and I didn't have some of those other environmental factors like social media and whatnot, um, really terrifying politics, all kinds of things to kind of
Yeah.
push me into, and especially the hypervigilance of motherhood, to push me into a more, active state of having ADHD. That being said, when I think about being a young person, um, I think about how many times I heard from my teachers, oh, if Rebecca would just apply herself, she
Mm.
would be working up to her potential. She's just not working up to her potential. And I think I heard that my entire elementary school life, even when I was doing amazing in school.
Huh.
Because I would do things, very, very commonly of like, um, you know, especially once I got to high school, um, you know, waiting until the last minute to do a paper. And I really do mean like the last minute. Like, I mean, something was due at 8 a.m. and I would start it at maybe midnight,
Mm,
and because one of the things that people who have ADHD, what makes us turns on all of our dopamine and gets us kind of more activated is a very intense deadline. It
Mm.
can really, really activate our
yeah.
mind. So so I would do all those kinds of things growing up. I had a really hard time sticking to any kind of task that required a little bit every day. You know how so much like people will talk about like if you want to make a change, just do a little bit every day. Like that is the least useful thing ever for my kind of brain because that's boring inherently.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able. Oh no, she's stuck. I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do
Mm,
it a
Active
little bit.
attention, it's like specialized attention, right? So it's like when I'm really interested in something, I will be all in. And if it's kind of boring, it's really hard to get my brain to activate. And so a little bit every day is kind of boring. So all that stuff happened in my young life. And again,
Okay.
I was really, really well able to mask it, especially because I happened coincidentally to be a really good test taker. So when
Mhm.
the test would comes and there's that like, ooh, the pressure's on, Rebecca, then like I'm like, ding, okay, let's do this. And so people weren't really aware of it. So I definitely see how it was there my whole life. Um, and I think that probably a lot of women specifically, or also probably different folks who are genderqueer, um, they probably were really good at masking it in their young life, but there were these little um, clues along the way, right? That looking back to me have become really obvious that it was always there. Also, um, ADHD does tend to run in families.
Mm.
And like I said before, my dad, looking back now, was absolutely ADHD. My mom was the first one to actually tell me that she thought she had ADHD, um, like at least a decade before I ever considered it in myself. And so it does seem to have a genetic component from what we can tell. And again, a lot of times I think for those of us in midlife or just, older millennials or whatever else, um, our parents never were diagnosed with ADHD,
Well,
right?
that's what I was gonna say. Like, did we even have the language for that back then? Like, was this even, or was this even a diagnosis back then? I'm like my brother-in-law, um, probably, yeah, he had probably has ADHD, but that wasn't what he was diagnosed with when he was younger, and he was put on like Ritalin or whatever was back in the day. So I think that's interesting too.
yeah. I wonder if there's a lot of neurodivergence, neurospicy, wonderful ingredients in my family, just my little family alone. But I'm wondering, where as a mom and as a partner and as somebody who really truly does love herself in a way now that, that you didn't even realize you didn't before, where are you seeing it as a superpower? Where are you experiencing ADHD as a superpower for yourself?
Sorry, my technology decided not to work for a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Sure.
No worries.
I'm
You were
wondering,
frozen in a very pretty face, though, just so you know. Oh, she's frozen
I'm
again.
yeah, well, hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I don't know that she can.
All right. Can you hear me? My question is, where are you feeling it as a superpower?
Oh, um, where am I feeling it as a superpower? I love that
Yeah.
question. Um, so as I've gotten to accept the way my mind works, I realize how deeply I can dive into things that I do care really passionately about. And and really make a lot of connections. One of the really great things about the ADHD mind is that we do tend to be able to make a lot of connections that other people are maybe aren't as obvious to other folks. And that's really great for me in some of the things that I'm passionate about, like writing and and um, you know, my one of my friends the other day was telling me like, you've always seemed so much younger than you actually are, and I hope that that was a compliment. I think a big part of that is that kind of like innate curiosity. I have a lot of curiosity and can kind of be endlessly curious about so many different things. And so I really do appreciate that. Um, and I believe that so much of what is hard about being really any kind of neurospicy is when we try to make ourselves fit in spaces that we don't fit. And the more I stop doing that and really appreciate who I am, um, and get allow myself to be interested in the things that I'm interested in, the more I see that a lot of other folks are also really interested in those things.
Mm.
Um, and um, and so it's been really connecting, actually. Like I have found it to be really connecting with folks, whether or not they have ADHD or not, um, because um, there's something about the way my brain works, which makes me really crave authenticity and
Mm.
vulnerability and connection. And I find that once I am kind of that way out in the world, I see how much it resonates with other people.
So it's sort of your, not only your superpower, but kind of your genius.
Love it.
Gee.
So, how do you distinguish between like sort of what's hard because you have ADHD and what's brilliant because of it? I mean, I hear you talking about, being able to dive deep on things, your emotional depth is different because of it. So, I mean, are there moments where you just feel like, dang it, this is just hard?
Yes.
Because I mean, we've been talking about all the lovely things. And so I guess the other part of that question is, are you able to grab on to remind yourself about how much of it makes makes you feel brilliant or is brilliant in those moments when it's hard?
I mean, sometimes, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's just hard. Um, so some of the things that are harder for me because of my ADHD brain, um, I seem to have like worsening working memory with every passing day. Like today, I was looking all over for these earbuds for like, I don't know, an hour. I was looking for these things. I'm not going to confess to where they were, but what I will say is that they were within arm's reach the whole time, and I lost a whole hour of my day. And if that only
Yeah.
happened once every 6 months, then it's not that big a deal. But it is not only once every 6 months, and so that can be challenging. I have to put up really strong scaffolding in my life to not be late to everything, because
Mm.
I can be chronically late because of a quality known as time blindness, which is really typical for folks of ADHD. Um, and And the reality is that there are many things I have to do in my life, just like is true for the two of you, that do kind of suck, right? Like I just had to pay my taxes. I had to do my taxes. I had to get all the information to the person who was going to help us do that. I have work requirements in my life that require really arduously boring things. And I have to be able to do them. I can't just not do them. And sometimes, um, I actually told this story when I was trying to get diagnosed because the first time when I could see that it wasn't going to happen, like there was one day for my work, my husband and I own a couple businesses together. And in one of our businesses, I had to mail something out that was somewhat important. And it wasn't just one thing. It was like I had to mail like 8 things. Um, and so I set about to mail out these important things, and I kept getting distracted by other things because I just, maybe I didn't know where all the supplies were and I didn't know where to find the address that I needed and, just kind of little things. So rather than doing it, I kept getting distracted. And then I would return to the fact that I actually do need to mail these things out. They 100% do need to go out today. And it took me like 6.5 hours to mail out a stack of envelopes, And this is a person, again, who has 2 master's degrees. Like, I am clearly a person who can, at some points in my life, exhibit competence, but there are certain things that can be insanely hard. And the whole time of that 6.5 hours that I was trying to mail out these envelopes, um, I was stressed about them. I wasn't like
Mm,
blithely like, oh, I don't care about the envelopes and it doesn't matter. Like the whole time I was wanting to mail them out, feeling, a lot of stress and shame and guilt about not mailing them out and yet not mailing them out. And so
hmm
those times can feel really awful. And, I go through periods where I can, have a lot of grace with myself about it. And I can have other times where I'm just like, this is ridiculous. And I'm very frustrated with myself. And it helps me that I happen to have people in my life who are also neurospicy in a variety of ways. And so I can kind of commiserate with them about it. And, I try to take those things as learning moments, like so many of us do, of like, okay, well, clearly this is not an actually challenging task to mail out these envelopes. So, kind of looking back, why was I not able to do it and try to, prevent it in the future? Things like that. So, yeah, there's definitely times where it does not feel like a superpower. It feels frustrating. And I do want to name again because I know that there are a lot of people who listen to your show that have an interesting hormonal life, we could say, is that it is incredibly tied to my cycle. So the first
mm,
2 weeks of my cycle, I do tend to experience the superpower aspect. I'm like on it. I want to talk to people. I want to do work on my projects. I can like take a project and work from it like the first day to the second day to the third day, no problem. Like, yeah. And then usually at some point in about the third week of my cycle, I'll just like hit a wall and I feel like a slug. And I struggle with that executive function piece a lot. And I think that that self awareness that I have now that really does come with maturity to some degree, right?
hmm
Is I can just recognize it now and be like, oh, yeah, must be the third week of my cycle.
Yeah.
So this is going to be
You can
hard, but
plan
it's
around it. Yeah.
okay. Next week, it's not going to be this
Yeah.
bad.
So
I mean,
nice. Oh,
I'm
that's,
sure that doesn't make it any less fun, but or less hard, but at least you know it now. Plan around it or not guilt yourself through it.
yeah. I was just thinking too, with a daughter, this probably makes you more attuned to emotions and needs and cycles and, all that's coming. If it's not already, there just with the hormonal ups and downs, how lucky she is to have you so aware of all of that.
I think I do think that having ADHD and going through this process of being diagnosed in midlife has made me a much better mom because what I see for my daughter is there are things where, she experiences overstimulation. And that's another thing that can be very true for a lot of folks with ADHD is to experience because I can see it in myself and how that I feel that in my body. When it happens for her, I'm really able to get in there with her in a way that I've seen other people struggle with or kind of dismiss her experience or just kind of not be able to see that her like say a tantrum or a behavior issue is really caused from overstimulation and things like that. And so I have a real lived experience of it and I use it all the time as a mom. I use it all the
Mhm.
time as a mom. And I see how, it's something we haven't really talked or touched on is that um, another aspect of ADHD can be something known as rejection sensitivity, which is this really
Mm.
interesting thing. I kind of thought it was a myth actually when I first
I've
started
learned
reading
about this
about it.
recently too. I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah.
Where um, you have the perception or the lived experience of rejection that is actually not what people are putting out there. And what is really tricky about this is that people who have ADHD are super good usually at picking up on like nonverbal cues between other people, right? So, like, I was always that kid in class who could tell when someone had a crush on someone else as long as it wasn't me, right? And I'd like months before people go out, I'd be like, I know that those two people like each other, la la la. Like I could just see it really well. And so I began to form this identity about myself. It's like I'm a person who can really perceive that kind of unspoken thing happening when people are interacting. But tragically, um, I don't I don't really understand why this is, but like the that perception is really off when it comes to myself.
Hmm.
And so I often, I've lived my whole life often thinking that people were kind of, or sensing them rejecting me when it wasn't true.
Mm,
And this really came home to me when like not that long ago, like 2 years ago, I was looking through a box of old papers and I had remembered during for one of my master's theses, I had remembered that my advisor had never really liked me and never really liked my work and had been kind of dismissive of me and really carried with that with me in my heart in this kind of like I failed at this certain thing kind of way. It's underlying limiting belief, you could say, that had come from that time. And anyway, I was looking through some old papers and I ended up coming across my original master's thesis. And I was reading over my thesis advisor's notes, and I was seeing how she had written dozens of complimentary, kind, loving, supportive notes over
Hmm.
and over and over again. And at the very end, she said something that there was kind of a flaw in what I had written that she wanted me to look at and fix. And she was right. Like the flaw that she was perceiving in the work itself was there, um and I had carried this story with me for 20 some years that my thesis
Wow.
advisor had not liked me. And
mm,
it really made me have to open my eyes about my perceptions. And so having had this experience and seeing this about me now, I again, I'm really able to get in there with my daughter when she
Yeah.
has had an experience at school and she'll say like, "Oh, like none of the kids at school like me." And I'll say like, "Okay, well let's backtrack about this a little bit. Like, what did they actually say to you? What were the words that they said?" And she'll say like, "Oh, they said that, I didn't do this thing right." Like, "Okay, that's were you doing that thing right?" And we'll kind of like take it piece by piece by piece to kind of get to the truth of what was going on, um, versus me kind of jumping in there and being like, "Oh, these kids are bullying you," or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm really able to see in her how she will um, interpret feedback in this specific way, and it's because I've lived it now. And you know, I have to just say a kind word about my husband here because he's been with me through this whole process. And he was really the one who made me see, like, very often, um, he would say something to me like, I don't know, hey, did you put the laundry away? You said you were going to put the laundry away, and again, this rejection sensitivity would come up and be like, why is Jason always judging me for not putting the laundry away? And, um, and I would just have to get to the point where I would stop and ask him, like, wait, when you asked me about me putting the laundry away, for example, were you feeling frustrated at that moment? Were you like, judging me about how I never do these things or blah, blah, blah? Or is there some kind of hardness about this? And he'd be like, no, I just wanted to know if I should go put the laundry away after work, things like that.
Wow.
And so that kind of like breaking things down has been really an important tool to have. But we can't do that unless we know we have rejection sensitivity, and
mm.
it's like knowing has really helped.
Have you, does your daughter know? I mean, is she at an age where she can, I know she's not very old, so is she, have you shared with her that, or are you just helping her through it now and at some point you'll teach her about it?
Um, so it doesn't actually seem like my daughter has ADHD. We'll have to see.
Hmm.
I don't know. Um,
Does
but
rejection that only happen with ADHD?
rejection sensitivity, as far as I know, is mostly a part of ADHD, but I do think
Ah,
we all feel rejection.
yeah,
And we all
Sure,
for
sure.
sure.
we all have situations where we jump to conclusions about what other people are thinking or feeling.
Yeah,
And so time will tell with her with that specific thing about whether it's an aspect of her neurospiciness or not. Um, but I think, I don't know, how many of us as tweens could have used a little support in just rather than jumping to conclusions about what other people were saying or feeling about us, we took
yeah,
a step back and just said, what did they actually say? You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, I
Mm.
love that. I love the. I identify as a highly sensitive human, so a lot of that relates and makes me think I should go back for a diagnosis. But I love how you're seeing that it is really, again, maybe a superpower or just a really highly honed parenting skill to be attuned to the emotions of others, to be attuned to the nonverbal things happening. Um, I live with, an amazing partner, but he misses all of that. He doesn't pick up on any of that. And it is exhausting to be the person who's absorbing. I mean, as a projector, like it's absorbing and picking up on all of it, but he's so grateful that somebody does, that things don't get missed. And I think sometimes my kids wish I would miss some things. Yeah.
So, so we know that connecting with nature is such a big part of your healing. I love watching all of your posts about nature. I feel like you live in the perfect spot for that. Can you share how working with plants and gardening has taught you a little bit about how your brain and body works?
Yeah, so something that I think a lot of us know is how much being in nature is just so great for our mental health, right? It's good for stress, it's good for anxiety, it's good for all the things, depression. And as I said before, anytime we experience stress, it's going to make any kind of challenges in our mental health worse. So, anytime we experience, I think, like a reduction of stress, it's going to be inherently useful. But I think beyond that, nature does more than just that for the ADHD mind and for the neuro spicy mind. I think that when we get out in nature, a lot of the stress we feel, and the analogy I think of a lot is, do you guys remember that toy that you played with as like a really tiny kid where you're trying to put like a circle in a circle spot, and you put the square in the square spot, and then there's like the star shaped one, you try to put that one in,
Yep.
and it doesn't really matter how much you try to stick that star shaped piece into the circle spot, it will like never go into the circle spot ever. And so when I'm in nature, I tell people like I feel like that star shaped piece all the time, and and then when I'm in nature, it's like I fit suddenly.
Oh,
It's
Mm.
just like, oh, I don't have to try to shove myself into this square anymore. That's great. And so um, there's just this really amazing beauty for me in that. And I most often find that in gardening. I'm kind of an obsessive gardener at this point. And for me, being able to be in the garden and to cultivate things and to care for beings, these plant beings, um, allows me to just be in my natural flow without having to, augment that in any way for humanity. And I actually love humanity too, but there is something really special about gardening for me in that. And the other thing I think that is really great for me about being in nature is that I think even though the type of ADHD that I have, there's no H, there's no hyperactivity really. I don't exhibit that at all. Um, there is something true for me about my brain works better when I'm moving, physically moving, when
Mhm.
I'm in movement. And in fact, when I was coaching, I don't know if you all, I'm not coaching right now, but when I was, at one point we were doing all of our calls on the phone and then we had to move to
Mhm.
video. Um,
Remember?
and moving to video was like the worst thing that ever happened in my coaching life because before that, I was able to move all the time and nobody knew,
Yeah.
right? Um, but but then once I was on video, I had to sit there, and it actually made it harder for me to focus on what people were saying and to really get in there with them. So for me, I think nature is really important. I think movement is really important, and I think being able to be somewhere where um, I just feel free from expectation is really important. And a lot of times people will ask me, like, well, don't you think there's kind of like, you know, why are so many people being diagnosed with ADHD now? Why are so many people being diagnosed with autism right now? You know, is it this thing or that thing? And, you know, certain politicians have had said some incredibly offensive things in even the last 24 hours about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
and I think that there's probably many, many, many reasons for this. But one I think that is not named a lot is that we have gone from, you know, as kind of a people, and I mean by we, I mean in the United States and in, you know, more colonizing cultures, we've gone from being people who were largely like wandering around in farmlands a lot and like, you know, picking berries and just being immersed in nature and moving all the time to like sitting at desks and being static a lot and having real financial, social, and like success based repercussions if you don't sit inside all the time.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I think that, again, if you think about this as a spectrum, we go from a place where you might have someone who's just a little quirky or just a little, you know, loses track of time here and there or has a lot of interests or whatever, um, in terms of what you might think of as a person who has ADHD or autism or something else. You go from that to someone who's actually really struggling,
Yeah.
right? And I think that I would love as a community and as a culture for us to think more about like um, how could we, rather than pathologize this or be so focused on diagnoses, how could we just look at um, you know, shifting certain things in our culture so that we're more connected to nature as a whole, or where we make that more acceptable. And then also a little bit of that canary in the coal mine thing, like if it's really challenging for my brain, it might not just be my brain, right? There might be a lot
Right.
of
Right.
folks who are like, would do so much better if they could just take a walk in the middle of the day for an hour and have a place where that was safe and inspiring to do so. And let's value that as a culture because it's what people need.
Love it.
I mean,
You
amen.
you just answered you partly answered and maybe completely answered what I was going to ask next. I really love that. I know that you are, I know you're brilliant and you're multifaceted. I always love to think of you as this witchy goddess. So what I was going to ask, so nature is a big answer to that, is like, for folks listening who themselves, you know, see themselves in your story, what are some practices or mindsets that have really helped you navigate and balance the ADHD with more compassion? So it sounds like obviously gardening and being in nature, but I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
I do. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that can be really useful. I think something that I resisted for a really long time, but eventually had to accept is exercise. And I say that because I've always been a person who kind of hated traditional forms of exercise. But even in the last 2 weeks, my daughter was off for spring break and I wasn't able to do my normal exercise practices. Um, and I just started to get so incredibly down about the state of the world. And to be clear,
Mhm.
there's a lot to be down about with the state of the world right now. And there's
Mhm.
like very good reasons to feel sad and angry and overwhelmed. But that being said, it isn't tremendously useful for that world for me to be kind of slogging around, doom scrolling for hours on end and whatnot. So I went back to exercise this week once my daughter went back to school, and I immediately felt so much better. And so I just have to say, it can be hard for folks with ADHD and other forms of neurospiciness to stick to any kind of exercise plan. But it's just so, so, so important that we do it. And there's a lot of studies about that out there. I think another thing that's really useful for me is scaffolding. So I am very unlikely to do something for myself, and all of the different kinds of, I don't know, productivity hacks out there, about like put it in your calendar. I mean, I can't tell you how easily I can ignore a calendar, let me tell you. And I can turn off the notification on my phone and everything else. So that doesn't work for me, but scaffolding, where I definitely will take my daughter to school no matter what. She will go to school every Monday through Friday, and so I just make sure that I do my exercise right after I drop her off. I don't go home. I don't do anything else. Or if I'm going to, let's say, develop, writing is something that I'm very passionate about. Um, I am really clear, like, okay, I'm going to take my computer with me. I'm going to go straight to the cafe, and I'm going to start writing immediately once I get there. So really finding less negotiable things that you will 100% do, and putting the things you want to do on that has been really helpful for me. Another thing that I just want to name, um, that I think is really helpful is so often in the kind of world of coaching and self-help and all these things, there's this idea that we should all like follow our bliss and like go where you're called, go where you're drawn, like let that lead you. And for a person with ADHD, that can be terrible because because I can like decide that, I want to be a florist, which I have, and then 2 weeks later I'm like, no, I'm going to actually, start a new program about such and such, and then 2 weeks later I feel really called and really drawn to, I don't know, develop a brand new Substack that's all about cooking. Like, I don't even know. Like, I have so many interests that if I went with every single one of my interests, I would literally get nothing done ever, ever. Right.
That's
So
a
what I
really good
do,
point. That's a really
so,
good point. Yeah.
and I got that advice a lot, you know what I mean? And I would believe it, because when you are called as a person with ADHD, I mean, it feels real. It feels like maybe my soul is calling me to now be a florist, you know? And I say that because I love flowers. I love cut flowers. Um, and so what I have started to do is, rather than, quit my job and buy all the floristry supplies and, spend 97 hours researching it, is I get a notebook and I just let myself write down all the things that I would like about that or I think are cool. And, I kind of let it be there in the notebook or on a, voice app on my phone or whatever else. Um, and then I just let it sit there for a couple weeks, and I let myself like dream about it without investing in it. And very, very often that thing passes or it becomes part of the whole, but it doesn't mean that I have to, yet again quit my job or enroll in a new certification program or, find, this kind of, I don't know, whatever it is, get a new
Buy a
PhD.
boat. Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Oh,
something.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like if you have ADHD, it's like you could have like a midlife crisis like every other week, you know? So
No.
rather than doing that, I think like just really honoring that like those things come and go and they can feel so compelling. And rather than shaming myself for it or engaging in it, I just am with it. I'm with the dream of it, you know?
I
And
I
that's
love
been
that.
really helpful and might be helpful for other people because I get the sense that a lot of the folks who listen to this, they love personal growth and all that stuff, and
Mhm.
it's great. But it's just a little different when you could potentially have a different job every 3 weeks.
It really like just begs to point out that you brought up your cycle and you said what you just said. And it reminds me so much of what Alex was saying when she was on, with the agenda period about, in your luteal phase or in your these phases, like, don't decide this is the guy for you. Don't say yes to this job. Like, so there's a lot of parallels here to the hormonal aspects of what you're saying, whether it's a coincidence or it actually really goes together or not. I love it. I love how similar those messages are. Sit with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably good for anybody because also you can just start to, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's actually my favorite tip. I love exercise. I love movement. I love getting out in nature. But I think that idea of just like have the idea, write it all down, but don't jump into it in any. Of course, I'm an emotional manifester, so I shouldn't do anything immediately either, as I ride an emotional wave. All right, let's talk about your song. I love you picked West Coast by Lana Del Rey. What drew you to that song other than being on the West Coast?
I love Lana Del Rey so much. It is ridiculous. And like there have been times that I've been completely obsessed with Lana Del Rey. I think I chose West Coast because I do live on the West Coast and I just love that kind of honoring of us out here in
Yep.
California.
And Oregon.
And Oregon too. I just
I'm
really
from
love it.
California, though.
Also
Yeah.
California. That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Um, yeah, so I really love that. But I think also as the thing that Lana does that I was craving before listening to her music was she gives voice to the deeply feeling woman, right?
Yeah.
And in in honoring that sometimes those feelings are imperfect or even um, hard or dark or you know I don't know, overly vulnerable in certain kinds of ways. And so I love that permission to really feel that deeply,
Mm,
and to be okay with it. Um, and yeah, so
mm.
that was a
I
good
love it
one.
because even as you're talking about it, you can just see you're like going off into dreamy land, thinking about it. That's awesome. She's
Yeah.
amazing. I love it.
I'm so, we adore you. I'm so glad you came. And this was just, I mean, you always strike me as articulate, but you're also so elegant and real. So, I mean, I'm so grateful because I do know so many people who struggle with different aspects of this, and you're making it so safe and so important to talk about and celebrate. And I don't know if you follow the Holderness family. Do you follow them on there? He does a lot of great stuff about ADHD. Is awesome, and I've really appreciated just when I've caught his stuff, like how some of my favorite creatives do also have ADHD, and you are a creative I've always admired, and so it's just really neat to spend this time with you. I appreciate it so much.
And to that end, we will link Rebecca's blog in our show notes. You can check out Flowers and Herbs on Substack and her site, RebeccaRihanna.com. Her writing and offerings, just like this gorgeous pod, is full of wisdom and soul and nature rooted insight. So, so happy to have had this time with you today, for sure.
Thank you. It's been so great to be here. And if even one person out there is benefited or gets a deeper acceptance of themselves, it will be more than worth it. And just spending the time with you is just so wonderful.
Oh, I gotcha. If this episode speaks to you, please share it with a friend. That's how our community grows. And if you're in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond, trying to make this your most vibrant, meaningful, and fun chapter yet, you are absolutely in the right place. And this is how you do it, by talking about all the ways that we can come together and support each other on the journey.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We are so glad you're here, and we will see you next time on The Things We Know.